Dr. Shabir, welcome to Let the Quran Speak.
Pleasure to be on.
We are concluding our wonderful series on women's clothing, Dr. Shabir. We've looked at a lot of things. We've looked at many different verses of the Quran, step by step, to try and see what they actually say about what a Muslim woman should wear. And then we looked at some hadith. I don't think we looked at all the hadith, but we looked at some of them. And that whole picture that we got is that our understanding of a woman's clothing that we understand today doesn't really come very clearly from the Quran and the hadith. It's not like we can say, okay, the Quran says this and that's why we're wearing this, and the hadith says this and that's why we're wearing this. So it gets a little bit confusing, and it seems like, as you said, Dr. Shabir, that it might have been a later development.
Yes. So surveying again, just to recap where we traveled with this, we looked at Surah 24, verse number 31, and we saw that it mentions the khimar, which commonly we understand to be a Muslim woman's head cover. But the verse does not specifically say that Muslim women must wear the head cover. It just took it for granted that the head cover is there, it is being worn, and the women were being told to draw a piece of that head cover over their bosoms to cover that part, lest that be exposed. So that seems to be the emphasis of that verse. Surah 33, verse number 59, we looked at, and that seems to be in the same vein as Surah 24, verse number 31, telling the women to draw their jilbabs, which is taken to be a large outer sheet, a large outer cloak, you might say, to cover the rest of the body when they go out. That way, they will be recognized and not molested. And but so that too does not give you the total outline saying that you have to cover from head to toe or anything like this, or anything close to that. It's just basically enjoining on women to be modest and to protect themselves lest they become the unwitting objects of harassment. The same Surah 24 that we looked at previously, there has another verse number 60, I believe, in which it said, and we discussed this in detail, where the women who are past the age of childbearing and are not looking forward to getting married, they are allowed to even do away with that outer garment, so they can appear in an ordinary dress, which would involve the exposure of some extremities of the body. Parts of the arm and shin and so on. But if she were to remain modest by still donning the outer garment, then this would be better for her. But again, this is not getting very specific and insisting that, if a woman's dress must be exactly like this, and if she's short by a couple of inches in any direction, then, she might suffer some penalty or anything like this. So this is how the Quran has left the matter. And we saw also that there is a verse of the Quran, Surah 33, verse number 53, that mentions the word hijab, but in that verse, it does not refer to any aspect of a woman's clothing. It refers to a screen that was placed in the home of the Prophet, peace be upon him, to separate his private living quarters from the semi-public place, his living room, in which he might welcome male guests and people who have questions about Islam or anything like that. So that's the Quranic picture in a nutshell.
Now the hadith.
Yeah, we looked at hadith and we saw that surprisingly, there is very little in the hadith about the details of women clothing, at least those that are authentically attributed to the Prophet, peace be upon him. The one that has the most clear detail that will conform to the broad outline that is prescribed in many books of Islamic jurisprudence about how the woman's clothing should be, is the one in Abu Dawood that mentions that the sister-in-law of the Prophet, peace be upon him, Asma, was being instructed to cover all of her body except her face and hands. But as Abu Dawood himself noted, this is a mursal tradition, it's not an authentic one. And when we go to the ones which are deemed to be authentic, they give very little detail. For example, they mention that when the verse of the Quran was revealed about hijab, the Muslim women came out of their homes with head coverings like crows on their heads. But that too does not say anything about the full extent of this head covering. Was it drawn over the face? Did it cover the ears? What does it mean that it was like crows on their heads? Is it like emphasizing the height of it rather than the coverage that it entails? So all of that is very vague, and these are not like prescriptions from the Prophet, peace be upon him, himself. It's just mentioning how the women behaved in reference to this verse. And one might say, okay, well, the Prophet, peace be upon him, conceded to all of that, but that may be one way of responding to the verse that is acceptable. It doesn't mean that that's the only acceptable way to respond to the verse. And here we must add something by way of clarification. Some Muslims recently have been running around with the idea that we must understand not only the Quran and the hadith, but we must understand them in the way in which this was understood by the earliest generation of Muslims. And sometimes they stretch it to generations. So we make it at least 3 generations of Muslims. But there's nothing in the Quran that says that you must understand the Quran as was understood by the earliest generations. We can say, yes, they lived close to that time, they know the circumstances and so on. And so they have a kind of insight on the meanings of these narratives that we have to depend on them for. But it doesn't mean that that's the be-all and end-all, that's the final insight. It could be that what they understood was most applicable to their time and place. And maybe a different meaning might apply to a different time and place. So it doesn't mean that what they concluded is the final conclusion. So with that clarification in mind, there is no clear instruction from the Prophet, peace be upon him, that the Muslim woman's dress should have this total extent, at least in narratives which are authentically reported from him.
So Dr. Shabir, at the end, we need to ask, okay, where do we go from here, right? And I'm wondering if looking at the verses again and seeing what the purposes of those verses were, because, in many of them, it's very explicit, right? God is saying, so that, you can be seen and not recognized and not molested, for example, right? So maybe if we look at those goals, maybe we can achieve those goals without necessarily, being bogged down by all the rules.
Yes, and perhaps this will be the next phase in the evolution of Muslim thought about the Muslim woman's garment in general and behavior and modesty more generally. So we saw that there is an evolution of thought in that the Quran did not specify the outlines, the Hadith did not specify the outlines, but Muslim scholars eventually specified the outlines.
To the point where it's like 1 point and 2 point, and it's a list.
Sometimes
right?
they list like
7 things or 8 things.
Yeah, 8 things that apply to the Muslim woman's garments. Some of which, of course, would apply to men's garments as well. Like, for example, it should be loose clothing. It should be not ostentatious. It should not resemble the dress of a particular other religious community, and so on. But some of them are very strict with regards to women. Some of these stipulations, like the woman is to be covered all of her body except her face, hands, and feet, according to the Hanafi school, or even the feet, according to some other schools, or even the face and hands, according to the Hanbali school. At least when she goes out of the house, she's going to appear in public. And some of these stipulations can be, difficult for women in many circumstances. So we see that in our present times, there is a greater interest among Muslims in what are called the maqasid, or the objectives of Islamic law, which is a point you just raised. Imam al-Shatibi is a great scholar from Al-Andalus in the Middle Ages, and he wrote a 5-volume book called Al-Muwafaqat, which deals with the objectives of Islamic law. And it is widely recognized among Muslims nowadays. It's not that Islamic law is not there given by some, a capricious deity who just is giving us laws for no good reason. But there are good reasons. There are objectives behind the laws. And we must look for the objectives and understand them in order to carry out the laws in the best way possible, to capture the spirit, not necessarily the letter always. So that's with things in general. Now, with the hijab in particular, it is important for us to see that the verses were already hinting at certain objectives. And we should keep those objectives in mind. Remaining modest, keeping women safe from unwanted advances from others, and
not being ostentatious.
Exactly, as men also are required to observe. So I think the objectives are very important, and maybe in the next stage of evolution of Muslim thought about this, we will stress more the objectives rather than the minutiae of stipulations.
Lots more we can talk about, Dr. Shabir, but let's end it there, and maybe we can come back to this subject at a different time.
Sure, I'd love to. Our videos reach people all over the world. We hope you will seize the opportunity to share in the reward from God. Please support us today.